Hello my dear listener and welcome to our channel. I'm Tommy Jansen, just an average guy in my early 40s. Until recently, life felt pretty smooth sailing. I had a happy marriage and no major personal issues. But things changed earlier this year. Despite not considering myself weak, I started noticing my wife exerting more control over our lives, making me question the balance in our relationship. Much of it was my own fault because I had often chosen the easy way out, giving in to her when we had different opinions on matters I regarded as less important. The problem was that I noted those differing opinions appearing more often, and it was high time I dug in my heels and stopped it before they became too common. Sandra, my 39-year-old wife, used a simple tactic: affection and good cooking when things went her way, and the opposite when I had objections. However, the main reason I chose the easy path was that I was usually too busy to care about daily matters. I was working as an engineer at the local branch of a nationwide construction company in the county capital, and we were very busy during the summers. I spent some time at the golf club, which Sandra didn't like very much. Last year, I spent a lot of time at the riding club stable where our 13-year-old daughter, Lena, had her horse, a gift from Sandra's parents. Since Sandra was afraid of horses, she insisted I help Lena take care of the horse. At first, I didn't enjoy it, but then I met Marianne, a friendly mother of one of the other young girls at the club, who helped make my visits enjoyable. Marianne patiently showed me the ropes since my knowledge of horses was limited. In return, I helped her with the heavy jobs because her husband claimed to be allergic to horses and refused to come to the stable. We had a good time together, but it was purely platonic, no affairs in sight. However, I can't deny my heart raced a bit when one day she joked, "I would seduce you within seconds if we were single." It seemed she noticed some hope in my expression because she followed up by saying she was currently quite unhappy with her husband and asked, "Are you the same nice guy at home as you are here?" I suggested she try me if we were both single, and she promised to do that. Both Sandra and I made good money, allowing us to afford a pleasant life. Thanks to my job's solid bank connections, I had invested in a house in a nice area where we had many good friends. Many of our friends envied me, as they only saw the sunny side of Sandra, who was the perfect hostess during our dinners and parties. Sandra and I met in line at the check-in desk at the nearest airport during a holiday trip to the Spanish island of Mallorca. Both of us were there with friends, and our groups met in line, which led to us running into each other several times at various spots on the island. I got her cell phone number, called her, and invited her to dinner at a nice restaurant, which marked the beginning of our love story. We stayed in touch even after returning from the island. Our chemistry was strong, and we were both usually very satisfied with our time together. However, Sandra's snobbish friends didn't accept me as her boyfriend when we were back home. They had no qualms about their actions during our holiday in Spain but seemed to believe that what happened on the Mediterranean island should stay there. Some regarded me as beneath them due to my first name and my background, having grown up in an infamous area of our city. Such simple matters as the area I grew up in weren't bad, and my stable job and current lifestyle didn't seem to matter to some of them. To my great relief, Sandra never agreed with her snobbish upper-class friends on that matter. While she might have appeared to be a trophy for me, I never saw her that way. To me, she was simply a lovely girl who happened to have wealthier parents. After a few months, Sandra had some issues with her medication, and her doctor suggested she skip it for a while. However, our spontaneous moments without taking precautions led to an unexpected pregnancy a few months later. This prompted us to marry quickly, as both of us wanted to ensure a stable environment for our child. To my relief, her parents had no objections. As their only child, Sandra received a beautiful summer house by a picturesque lake outside our hometown as a wedding gift. This was a clever decision by her parents, allowing them to resolve maintenance issues while still enjoying the property as they wished. I owned our house in town before we married and kept that as my private property to balance out her summer house. We shared everything else, and there was never any talk of my house or your house. I genuinely liked Sandra's parents. They had successfully run a furniture factory before selling it for a good price and buying a nice house in Marbella, southern Spain, when her father turned 60. I enjoyed visiting them there, but Sandra wasn't fond of the hot climate, which made me realize we could face challenges if she were to inherit that house. Sandra worked at one of the leading insurance companies and had recently been promoted to a vice department role for special projects. To my disappointment, I slowly began to sense that her new position was negatively affecting our marriage. She wasn't the same Sandra I had known before. When I asked if she had any problems, she simply said she had many new things to learn at her job, which was why she was more tired than usual. She assured me everything would improve once she got the hang of it. Unfortunately, even our intimacy began to suffer due to her changed behavior. Although I didn't see any obvious signs of an affair, no late nights, no new outfits, and no strange phone calls, she reacted angrily when I jokingly suggested she might be involved with someone else after a less than stellar Saturday night. While she rarely spoke about her job at home, she had been boasting over the past couple of weeks about working on a significant contract. Though she claimed to trust me completely, she didn't share many details about her project. I knew quite a bit about what was happening in our city and had my suspicions, but since it didn't seem crucial, I didn't press her for more information. Then everything changed one Tuesday evening when Sandra came home from work looking strange. I sensed immediately that something was off and asked, "What's the matter? Have you been fired?" "Of course not. Quite the opposite, in fact. We're almost finished with a big project and have a successful deal," she replied. Yet, I could tell she was far from in a celebratory mood. "Please don't try to make a fool of me. I can tell something's bothering you." She hesitated before admitting, "You're somewhat right. I have another important project to think about, and it's connected to the first one." "Okay, so what's the problem?" "The second project is out of town and requires some traveling, possibly even overnight stays. The first trip will be this Friday." I felt uneasy about her attempt to share good news before mentioning her main concern about the trip. The mention of Friday night raised my suspicions. I asked where it was, and she told me the name of a small town on the coast, only 45 kilometers away. I was shocked. I began to worry that she might be involved in something questionable, but I pretended to know nothing more than what she had already shared. "So, you'll be staying overnight when it only takes half an hour to get home? The responsible manager can't be there before 5, and will need time to review the property before we can sign the deal. After that, it's my job to host a dinner that my company has organized to celebrate the deal and our future business connections." Nothing seemed amiss about that, though I felt I knew how she would respond. I asked, "It depends on what kind of property you'll be inspecting, considering your education is limited to economic matters." She replied, "It's a large leisure area with 45 holiday chalets." Just as I suspected, Sandra had become involved in business with Oscar, who had likely deceived her and her incompetent boss. I knew Oscar from childhood. We grew up in the same neighborhood. He had once sold a car to the local slumlord's daughter, married her, and had 2 children. Their marriage turned into a peculiar arrangement, with her having a secret girlfriend and Oscar boasting about his affairs with several married women. At the leisure area, where Oscar had a well-equipped chalet, he and his wife had an important agreement to keep their affairs out of their hometown. Oscar was well regarded by his wealthy wife's family because the slumlord's son wasn't bright enough to be of any help in their family business. Oscar, however, was ruthless enough to fit in perfectly. Having been involved in the local construction industry, I had heard the rumors about Oscar's dealings. I knew he had recently acquired an entire area with about 500 rundown apartments from the community, which was trying to rid itself of a bad reputation as a declining area. I decided to play along for a little while longer and said, "This seems to be quite a strange situation. Will that dinner really take the whole night? How many people from your office are going?" "Only me this time, and there will be some good wine included in such an important celebration dinner," she replied. "Do you really want me to be a drunk driver?" I asked. "Do you believe you have the necessary qualifications to assess those 45 chalets, which are in varying states of repair? I could come with you and help for free and drive you home afterward. It's not a final survey, just a simple inspection for more information about the project." "No thanks," she said. "In my position, I don't want you involved in my work. Haven't you heard of taxis? They still exist in this country, and they would probably even be cheaper for your company than a room at a decent hotel by the coast." She started to look uncomfortable as she realized she was cornering herself in our discussion, but she pressed on. "I'll get a guest house in the leisure area for free, and I'll be paid for my overtime and a subsistence allowance." "Who's demanding that you go there for Friday night? Your boss, the customer, or is it your own suggestion?" "My boss, of course. He intended to go himself, but he's busy elsewhere, so he suggested that I represent our company in this very important deal. It will be a great opportunity for me, and there's no reason for you to interfere in my work." At that point, I couldn't hold back my frustration. "A great opportunity to be involved with Oscar? You should know there are cameras in his chalet." She was taken aback by my outburst and fell silent, so I continued, "Oscar has a reputation for sharing his videos with his golf club friends. I'm sure his latest video with you would be quite a spectacle among them. Both Oscar and I are members of the same golf club, and he has bragged about having hidden cameras in his guest accommodations, likely inviting you there under the pretense of business discussions. Oscar had a well-equipped chalet with an office and a guest room connected to his own bedroom. He once showed me pictures of him with a beautiful business owner's wife after a maintenance negotiation, suggesting that I could join if I was more interested in collaborating with him. I had firmly told him to take a one-way trip somewhere far away. Oscar often claimed that such pictures served as an irresistible invitation for women, as they would often agree to meet him after seeing them, with his promise that no one else would see those images. Not all the women he entertained in his chalet were coerced. Many enjoyed the attention from someone infamous like Oscar and willingly participated in his escapades. I was surprised he would try his tricks on my wife, but it could have been a retaliatory move against me because my company had refused to take on any cheap, unapproved jobs for him. He had made some sour comments about paying me back with interest when we met at the golf club. Many of Oscar's dubious actions were well known in the business community and should have been known by Sandra's boss as well. The knowledge that her boss had somehow convinced my conservative wife to spend a night in Oscar's chalet was shocking. She wasn't naive and should have understood the implications of such an arrangement. Now, she sat sobbing at the table. "It's not what you think. It's not anything like that," she insisted. "No, it's much worse. This is probably a disaster. But remember, if you want to be involved with Oscar, you can forget this marriage. Do you understand?" She didn't reply, so I raised my voice. "Do you understand that getting involved with Oscar will end our marriage?" She nodded. I picked up the phone book, called Oscar's mother, introduced myself as a childhood friend, and obtained his private number. When his wife, Emily Pyler, answered, I explained who I was and said I had an important business matter to discuss with her husband. She told me Oscar was at the golf club. I thanked her for the information and turned to Sandra, who was still sobbing. "I have some important business to handle," I said, and headed for the door. Sandra was obviously in shock. My reaction was not what she was used to. I felt overwhelmed, as if I were a camel whose back had finally broken under the last straw. When I opened the car door, she rushed to the entrance and shouted after me, "Don't do anything stupid. If you harass Mr. Pyler, I'll file for divorce." I went straight to the golf club, got information about when Oscar and two others had started playing, and anticipated he'd be at hole 15. When I saw him in the distance, he recognized my purpose and threw his club down, attempting to flee. It took me almost 100 meters to catch up to him. I didn't waste time arguing. I felt he deserved to face the consequences for damaging my marriage. I knew I had limited time before his friends or other players would intervene, so I did my best to make it a memorable encounter for him. A couple of solid punches sent him to the ground, and I used the remaining time before being interrupted to assert my anger. When his friends and some other players arrived, I told them not to try to stop me and walked away toward the clubhouse where my car was parked. There, a police car with two young officers waited. They politely asked if I preferred to handle things the easy way, which I agreed to, getting into the back seat of their car. There wasn't much conversation during the ride to the station, where I was taken to a small office and asked many questions. I recounted my story about Oscar, who had envied my marriage, and how he had attempted to provoke a confrontation at the golf club. I told them I had defended myself against his aggression. I didn't think the officer believed all of my account, but it didn't seem to matter as he recorded what I said. After signing my statement, I was placed in a holding area while he contacted a prosecutor. About 5 hours later, I was released and driven back to the clubhouse by a patrol car. I knew my chances of avoiding a trial were quite good because such cases usually got pushed to the back of the pile, and if nothing happened within 2 years, they would be dismissed. When I returned home, Sandra was still in the kitchen. "Where have you been?" she asked. "At the police station." "What did you do there?" "Not much, just answered their questions about your friend Oscar at the golf club." Suddenly, her face drained of color. "Holy Lord, what have you done to Oscar Pilar?" "It's not my fault that he's so fragile. He confronted me, and now he's at the hospital." I knew that was far from the complete truth, but I continued with my version in case they investigated at her workplace and asked what she had told her colleagues. Sandra looked at me, tears in her eyes. "I'll sleep in the spare room tonight." I heard her lock the door from the inside. I realized that there had been much happier times in our marriage. She was up early the next morning, and the only thing she said to me before leaving for work was that we needed to have a serious talk that evening. I agreed. The first thing I did at my job was contact the lawyer who had previously handled some cases for the company. He had a reputation for being tough and efficient, and we had become friends over the years. He promised to help me pursue Sandra's employer. A half hour later, he called back to say he had set up a meeting with the district chief at Sandra's job for 2 o'clock that same day. At 2 o'clock on the dot, my lawyer and I entered the district chief's office, where he and Sandra's boss were waiting for us. It was clear that the insurance company directors held my lawyer in high regard because they agreed to his statements without much resistance. Sandra's boss appeared quite frightened, and my lawyer pressured him into admitting that, although he was aware of Oscar's reputation, he had insisted that Sandra accompany Oscar for what he claimed was a routine survey of the chalet. He also implied that she would spend the night there with him, denying any inappropriate intentions. My lawyer pointed out that even someone with little understanding should have recognized what Oscar expected. The district chief began to sweat when my lawyer accused him of acting irresponsibly and explained the potential legal consequences for those who exploited women in such situations. We even signed an agreement stating that they would cancel the deal with Oscar Pilar and cover all my lawyer's expenses. I wasn't sure I would have received anything more than high costs for myself had we pursued this in court, but the district chief knew that the negative publicity would cost them far more than our agreement. I believe he realized I had done him a favor by ensuring they canceled Oscar's contract, as Sandra's team had clearly mishandled negotiations with someone like Oscar. After the meeting, I contacted a friend at the insurance company that my employer worked with and informed him that Oscar Pilar's insurance on his new property had been canceled and would soon be back on the market. He promised me a fair bonus if they secured the contract. When Sandra came home that evening, her demeanor was fierce, and I couldn't catch much of what she screamed, but it was clear I was not her favorite person at the moment. She packed a suitcase, shouted something about her summer house, and left. Our daughter Lena appeared scared by her mother's outburst, but since Sandra didn't ask her to join her, Lena stayed with me without any further questions. We went to the stable, where I met Marianne, who had a small but noticeable bruise. She confided that her husband had hit her during an argument about credit card bills from his online poker games. When I told her that Sandra had moved out to the summer house because I had stopped her from spending the night with a client, Marianne gave me a heartfelt hug that unexpectedly turned into our first kiss. Still holding her, she asked, "Don't you think we would have fewer problems if we lived together instead of with our spouses?" I simply replied, "Yes," and kissed her again, this time more passionately. We both felt a sense of relief, realizing that if our marriages fell apart, we had an alternative. After leaving the stable, I went to my den to check the burglar alarm at Sandra's summer house. The several-year-old equipment protected the doors and windows and detected movement indoors. As I expected, Sandra was home and had turned it off. However, I had also installed new outdoor equipment that I was testing before purchasing several for my work. When a car or person was within 50 meters of the house, it activated a hidden digital camera disguised as a birdhouse, capturing images and sending alerts to my cell phone via the internet. Since this equipment had been a test for my job, Sandra had never asked how it worked when I got her permission to test it there, although I didn't care much about it. On Wednesday and Thursday evenings, I knew that her car was the only one outside the summer house. On Friday after work, I ran some errands and then Lena and I went to the supermarket to shop before I prepared dinner for us. Sandra had not made any attempts to contact me since she left the house, and I told myself that I wouldn't reach out to her either. Instead, I looked forward to seeing Marianne at the stable on Saturday. However, around 6:30, I received an alarm on my cell phone, and the pictures from the camera showed a silver metallic Lexus SUV parked next to Sandra's car. The only such car I had ever seen in our town belonged to Oscar, so I knew that something had gone wrong. At 13, it wasn't unusual for Lena to be home alone for a short time, especially on a sunny summer evening. She accepted that I was gone for a while. There wasn't much traffic, so I reached the summer house in less than half an hour, parking so my car wasn't visible from the house. I sneaked in, using the key I had on my key ring. Inside, I didn't see anyone in the large living room, but I heard a female voice yelling from the master bedroom. I put my cell phone on sound recording and moved closer. Outside the room, I heard Sandra shout, "No! I never agreed to anything like that." Then a male voice responded, "Shut up. Max promised me good times, and I'll show you what that means." Sandra shouted back, "Nobody gets to take advantage of me. You've already overstepped." The male voice grew angry, clearly not accustomed to being challenged. The next sound from the bedroom was a loud slap, followed by Sandra's piercing scream. I had recorded enough and switched my phone to camera mode, taking 9 pictures with one press of the button. At that moment, Sandra and Oscar didn't notice when I entered the room until they saw the flash from the camera. Both of them were in a compromising situation on the master bed. Oscar, with a black eye from our last encounter, had Sandra lying on her stomach. Before he could react, I put my phone away and delivered a swift punch to his chin. I continued hitting him until he lay still, no longer resisting. Even though he was awake, he offered no defense when I dragged him outside to his car, laying him in front of it with the license plate clearly visible. I pulled out my phone, switched it to video recording, and began filming. He made no attempt to escape, not even when I captured him on camera. When I finished, I told him that if he bragged about what happened, he could expect the video to be shared online. I then shouted, "Get off my property, or I'll smash your car." When he didn't move quickly enough, I picked up a large stone and threw it at the windshield, which shattered. Oscar hurried into the car, fortunate that he had left the keys in it. He drove away without any further damage to his vehicle. I knew I had acted irrationally, but my anger towards those who hurt women justified my actions in my mind. It didn't matter that Sandra had acted poorly, that was no excuse for Oscar's behavior. In most people's eyes, I had only given him what he deserved. Now it was up to Oscar to keep quiet. If he did, no one would ever know what happened that day. Back in the house, I found Sandra already in the shower with the door locked. I noticed both her and Oscar's clothes neatly arranged on chairs on either side of the bed, showing hardly any signs of struggle. I took a few pictures for my records in case Sandra tried to claim she had been assaulted. I grabbed a plastic trash bag and collected Oscar's belongings, then wrote a brief message to Sandra. "Dear Sandra, I promise to divorce you if you continue with Oscar. Now you have what you clearly wanted. Tommy." I suspected she would stay in the shower until I left, so I took the bag and made my first stop at Oscar's house. The garage door was open, but Oscar's car wasn't visible. I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. When Oscar's wife answered, I handed her the bag and explained how I had found these items in the master bedroom of my summer house. Then I continued with a less than truthful story about how, when I entered the house, poor Oscar had left both my wife and his belongings behind when he ran away in a hurry. Unfortunately, he stumbled on the doorstep and probably hurt himself a bit when he fell. To my surprise, she smiled and thanked me for taking care of his belongings. I told Lena that her mother and I were having problems and would probably live apart for the time being, but she could see either of us whenever she wanted. She said that was fine with her because several of her friends were in similar situations, and it usually worked without issues. Afterward, I thought there would be no harm if Sandra's parents heard my version first, so I called them in Spain and told them that I had found Sandra with Oscar, one of the worst characters in town, at her summer house, and that our marriage was beyond repair. I reassured them that, regardless of what Sandra and I were going through, Lena was still their granddaughter. At the stable on Saturday, I told Marie that I could finally start thinking about being single, although it would take about 6 months to make it official. I shared with her what I had discovered at Sandra's summer house. I didn't try to persuade her to leave her husband, that was entirely her decision. Back at home, I found Sandra sitting at the kitchen table, looking quite distressed. She had every reason to feel that way. It seemed she wanted to talk, which was fine with me. I told her I didn't need any further explanation since I had overheard her and Oscar discussing everything I needed to know, and the evidence I had was more than sufficient. She recognized that it wasn't the right time to discuss forgiveness, so we focused on addressing the most important questions about Lena and other practical matters, deciding to meet again in a week to work out a new plan. At our next meeting, we found we had only slightly differing opinions on most issues, and after less than 2 hours, we signed the divorce papers. Once she left the house, I felt both relieved and surprised at how smoothly everything had gone. I couldn't shake the strange feeling that Sandra, for some unknown reason, wanted to be rid of me just as much as I wanted to be rid of her. She had no objections to shared custody of Lena, who would stay primarily with me and spend as much time as she wanted with Sandra. It took me a while to understand why Sandra had allowed Oscar to be with her at the summer house. However, I got a clue from a hidden camera outside her summer house, which revealed her boss as a frequent night visitor. Learning about their relationship led me to call their district chief and ask his opinion about a supervisor being involved with an employee and essentially encouraging her to engage with one of their customers. To my surprise, the district chief informed me that he had already addressed the situation with Mr. Oscar and didn't care about what his employees did in their personal time. I told him I would find another solution. 3 days later, I went to the supervisor's office and confronted him about his involvement with my wife before our divorce and about sending her to Oscar. The man laughed and dismissed me, asking what I could do about it. I showed him exactly what I could do, and a fair guess would be that he wouldn't be able to engage with anyone for quite some time after that encounter, which involved several forceful kicks. Before I left, I warned him that one word to the police would land the entire scandal in the tabloids. The only thing that happened after that visit was a call from Sandra, who was furious. I limited my replies to a few polite yes, dear, which didn't improve her mood. At the stable, I didn't really know what to do with Marianne. Of course, I wanted her to leave her husband and come to my house, but I knew it had to be her decision. When she asked me if I had been out dating yet, I told her the truth, I hadn't. She continued, "What would you say if I left my husband?" I replied, "The best possible solution would be with you. Can I trust you?" "Yes." Nothing more was said on that matter during the entire following week until she called me one day at work. She told me that the local gambling shop owner had contacted her about her husband's debts. When she confronted him at his job, they had gotten into a terrible quarrel, which ended with him threatening to beat her when he came home after work. Now, she didn't dare go home. I took a well-built carpenter from one of our building sites with me and met her outside her home. She gathered her 2 children and everything she wanted to bring with her for the time being without any problems. At my house, I let her and her children take over the master bedroom so they could be together during their first night, which must have been a difficult experience for all of them. Marianne and I didn't have any intimacy before she decided to divorce her husband and sign the papers. He intended to fight against it, which I regarded as a demonstration without any real significance. In the meantime, we reorganized the house so both of Marianne's kids had their own rooms. To our great pleasure, Lena and her children, who already knew each other from the riding club, acted like sisters in many ways. Her son, Alexander, and I became friends quickly. I became his soccer dad. Marianne's and my first intimate encounter was memorable. We shared such tenderness and connection. She was much more active than Sandra and encouraged me to try things I hadn't done in the last 20 years. Marianne became so pleased that she began to cry from pure happiness. She told me that during the last 5 or 6 years, her husband had only been interested in quick encounters whenever he felt up for it. We both admitted that we had dreamed of that night for a long time. Before anything happened, it felt advantageous for both of us that it wasn't our love for each other that had ended our marriages, and no one could blame us for finding a new love after our spouses had damaged our relationships. Sandra and I had a long, serious talk when we met at a cafe to resolve some matters about Lena. Even though I knew all I wanted to know about her infidelity, I never asked her any further questions about her relationships with Oscar and Max. To my great surprise, Sandra began to confess that destroying our marriage was the most foolish thing she had ever done in her life, and she regretted it deeply because she missed me and our family life so much, realizing she had lost me forever. Her confession was almost a cliché. It began with her and Max going out for lunch at different restaurants. After a while, they developed a strong personal relationship but had no intimacy until Max told her she would be promoted to vice boss, with a fair chance to get his job when he got his anticipated promotion to district chief. They celebrated this with lunch at a small hotel where Max had booked a room, and they took the afternoon off. She felt remorse when she got home, but the prospect of being the first woman at such a high level in their district office cooled her guilt. She didn't love Max, had no intentions of leaving me, and regarded him only as a very good friend and an important mentor. Their weekly encounters became an enjoyable part of the job. Max had serious financial problems after his divorce and couldn't resist the temptation when Oscar suggested a big kickback for a good deal involving his new problem area, insurance. The desperate Max accepted and immediately received a large amount in advance, which he had already used when Oscar revealed his final conditions to Sandra's horror. These conditions included a night with her. Sandra had refused, but Max succeeded in persuading her to cooperate after Oscar threatened to send evidence of Max's corruption to their main office and demand his money back. After my lawyer and I intervened and got the whole insurance deal canceled, Sandra thought the matter was moot. However, Oscar insisted on getting what he had already paid for in advance and demanded it on Friday night, as they had agreed. Sandra informed Max about Oscar's perversions and refused to have anything further to do with him. She even offered to ask her parents for a loan to pay back his kickback with fair interest, but Oscar wanted to get even with me and forced Max to tell her that he would accept nothing less than the already agreed upon night with Sandra. During their Friday lunch, Max told her that Oscar had agreed to skip all perversions and begged her to be a good girl for Oscar this one time. He suggested that she could do it at her summer house, where Oscar didn't have any hidden cameras. Though she had serious doubts in her mind, she succumbed to Max's pleading and agreed to have that one night with Oscar, but only to save their jobs. I had no reason to doubt her when she told me that evening was the worst mistake of her life, and she still had terrible nightmares about it now and then. Oscar had not contacted her since a short phone call a few hours later that same evening, when he asked about his clothes. She gave me a strange look when I told her that I had convinced Oscar to behave and that he would never harass her again. I didn't care if he did something to Max, that was their issue. She took care of Max for a few days when he was in bad shape after my beating, but instead of intimacy, they had a lot of arguments. She accused him of destroying her marriage, and he accused her of wanting the promotion so badly that it made her do things a faithful wife would never do. She regretted their affair immensely. Only 2 weeks after my beating of Max, the district chief at her office had a stroke and was replaced with a new chief from their main office. He investigated Max's deal with Oscar and got rid of Max by giving him a choice between being fired or taking an unimportant job at a small district office in the north. Max promised Sandra that he had never mentioned anything to the new chief about her involvement in their negotiations with Oscar. Sandra hadn't missed Max for even a minute when he left for the north because she had gotten his department boss job. However, after the reorganization, it was now a slightly less important position. Still, she had climbed to the highest position a woman had ever held at the district office. She confessed it wasn't worth the high price she had paid to get there. Terrible remorse made her cry during many lonely nights. She even feared for her future at work and had nightmares about her new district chief, suspecting that he regarded her as available. Sandra told me that her dream and hope were to get me back, but she had come to understand that it was impossible. To her great relief, she had been on 2 dates with a nice guy, and if it developed into a relationship, she intended to tell him the truth and let him decide if her background or her future was more important to him. If the new district chief made any advances, she would prefer to create a scandal and quit her job. I wished her good luck in her new life. 2 months after Marianne and her children moved in with Lena and me, we were living as a happy family. There was much laughter and giggling in the house. Our family fun on Friday evenings was such a joyful event that none of the children wanted to miss it by visiting their other parent. I was a happy man again, with a loving wife. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.